All right, I think we're starting just about a minute or so early. And for those of you who are used to joining me on my live stream on Tuesdays, sorry about the schedule change. This is Glenn Morgan. This is We the Govern, in case you don't know already. And this is my live stream, the only one I'll be doing this week. Normally, I do try to do these on Tuesdays at 5:30, and scheduling-wise, just wasn't able to pull it off this week. Has nothing to do, actually, with work. Usually, it has to do with conflict with the speaking engagement. But in this case, I'm actually taking my daughter to look at a college out of state. And so when you travel like that, I'm just not going to be able to do a live stream on the road like that very easily. So I want to jump right into this today if I can. I'll start out with a couple things that I have promised in the past to do, but I didn't write down a lot of the details that I would normally have here, so I'll just go over the next couple of events. For those of you who know me and have seen me for a longer period of time, you know I speak on the road a lot, travel all over the state. I actually drive about 40,000 miles a year on average, just in Washington State mostly. So odds are, if you want to see me in person, usually you can. The next two events that I'll be speaking at, one is March 29th at the Clark County Lincoln Day Dinner. I'll be speaking there and probably helping out a little bit with the dessert dash and maybe some other things. Happy to see anybody who wants to show up in Clark County at that. It's down in Vancouver. That'll be the 29th in the evening. And April 12th in Kitsap County, I'll be doing the Lincoln Day Dinner there as well. So I know I have some other events moving forward after that, but those are the only two I could remember just right off the top of my head anyway on my calendar coming up. I do have, we've been talking about Doge training here for a little while, and essentially that's the process of teaching people how to find corruption and incompetence and dishonesty in local government. I'm actually still working. I pretty much have the venues lined up, and now I'm just working on the schedule for Marysville, Tumwater, Clark County, Spokane, Tri-Cities, and probably Bellingham and Clallam for just a sample of the locations where I expect to be putting on these classes over the next few months. I do have some venues that I know I'm going to be doing the classes in, and really it's just about me. Some of them are churches, and I'm still working with the pastors on what days will actually work best. They've been very accommodating. It's more about me fitting into my schedule at this point in time. And I want to make sure that if you come that we're very prepared and that we have lots of good things to talk about there. Real quick, if you're going to be leaving, if you're going to be asking me questions, because this is an interactive format here, try to make sure you do this like you see down below. Hit the @WeTheGovern if you're asking an actual question. If you're just commenting back and forth, you can leave that off, no problem. I just have to go through and pick your question out of the communication between other viewers at the same time. And so sometimes it's just a little bit easier if I can see it if you put that in the bottom down below. When I am attempting to answer a question, or at least if I haven't gone entirely off the rails in a totally different topic, the question that I'm theoretically answering is going to be on the screen while I'm trying to answer it for you. So that's the easiest way for you to know what question I'm on and if I'm getting to your question or not. I do try to basically get to those questions as they are asked. And some people have wondered why it takes me a few minutes to get started asking the questions, or answering the questions anyway, in the beginning of the show. And it's because when the show first starts up, it usually takes a few minutes to populate questions over on my screen. I have two camera screens here because this is the screen that I'm looking at, pulling up questions. And it's just a little bit easier for me to see that. And if you kind of see a look out here on the more wider view of the studio, this screen is just really what I'm looking at on my YouTube channel. And I'm actually just looking at this to make sure I can see the traffic and how many people are logged on. Right now there's 75 people, for example, or 79, I guess, on at a time. And then over here, I can see, I do have questions here, but they're hard for me to read. And it's a little bit easier if I can focus on them, and they're right here. And this little control box that I have here, this is what allows me to switch camera screens. I only do that just because I think it gives you a better sense. This isn't... I wish I could say this was a homebrew studio, but it's not. It's actually a really nice studio that I got a chance to borrow. And since beggars can't be choosers, sometimes I don't always have control of the time of when I'm here. But I'm happy to be here and happy to have you watching the show. Let's jump into some of these questions because I see a couple of them are popping up here. And we'll see if I can do a better job here. Here's a question that Jack Palder had. odds on Inslee running for Newsom's VP? Well, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, you're going to see tons of commentary around the country of speculation about who could potentially be running for government or running for president in 2028. Inevitably, the party out of power becomes a palace intrigue kind of thing where they're focused on trying to figure out who's going to be running for president this next cycle. Really, there's probably a little bit of that on the Republican side as well, though I would say that Vance probably has the front inside track anyway on that. But Inslee is just not, I don't know what he would bring to the party for Newsom. Newsom is probably, if I'm judging correctly, what he is attempting to do with his goofy podcast program that he's running right now. He seems to be trying to pretend or reinvent himself as somewhat of a normal person instead of a crazy leftist that he actually is. So it's making him seem really slimy because, you know, here you supposedly have a belief system and now you're just suddenly throwing that away and you're shifting over. Now, everybody has their own evolution in their political viewpoints, I suppose, and that could be what Newsom's going through right now. But what does Inslee have to offer there? When he tried to run himself, he couldn't even break 1%. When he tried to run for president last time, he was a complete and miserable failure in that way. He hasn't done anything good for Washington State in his time here other than setting up really expensive grifting operations, leaving Washington State in debt and lots of messes behind. So I can't see that Inslee's going to bring Newsom any value. I wouldn't see that he's a likely candidate to be anybody's VP. Let's see. Brian B., can you catch us up on the stripping of the parents' rights bill? Oh, well, okay. So today there was a bunch of drama, too, apparently in one of the hearings where they threw out the people who were attempting to do this commenting in person. And Tim Eyman was there. That's kind of what made the headlines, of course, when I was reading that in the article that I read about it. I actually haven't had a chance to talk to Tim, and I haven't had a chance to talk to anybody else that was there. I'll probably be talking to you, people who are watching this show right now. Some of you were probably there to go and testify. However, reading between the lines and some of the comments that I did see, it looks to me like the Democrats have been particularly bad about this, by the way. It used to be when I would go down and testify in person in the legislature, say back in 2011 or 12 or something, back when I started doing more of it back then, they would generally, you sign up, you're on order, it's a sign-up sheet, and the legislator, whoever's chair of the hearing, they would simply call you in order. So if you were the second person down, they'd call you up. Sometimes they would know if you're con or pro, and they might call two up of each, and you could sit up. If you see those videos on TVW, there's basically it's like a table you're sitting at, and oftentimes there's like 4 or 5 chairs there sometimes, and so they'll call up a group of people to come up and testify so they can make it more efficient and call on each person. What they would do, though, now is they've manipulated most of the public hearings, and I say they, I'm talking about the Democrats, where they willfully try to stack the hearings in politically charged committee hearings, which the parent rights bill has become, and they'll only have their supporters come up and testify. And so what it sounds like is they were trying to cut off the testimony of anybody who opposed it so that the TVW would only show the testimony of those who were in favor of the dumb bill that the Democrats have basically hung around their own necks in an effort to destroy the will of the voters and make sure that they have no parents' rights in Washington State. Now, they've generated so much national mockery and blowback on themselves over it that the Democrats want to minimize how much exposure they get in these silly hearings. And so they apparently called out security and threw out Eyman and threw out a bunch of other people who were probably starting to raise a ruckus, especially if you've had some experience in Olympia and you know how corrupt the process is that they're trying to follow right now. The Democrats attempting to silence all dissenting speaking in Olympia is ridiculous, but I guess that's what they expect you to do. If there's one group of people that does like to silence the rest of us, it's definitely the progressive lefties right now. And the cult of socialism kind of continues to roll forward, and part of it is silencing all alternative narratives. I mean, it's a requirement, and they're definitely pushing that hard right now. So going into the next question, I think, Brian, you had 2 questions in a row, but I'll get to them because this was a pretty relevant one to a video that I just produced today, which is the overturning of the natural gas measure, the 2066 hearing that was a King County judge, Sandra Widlan, I think was her name, Widlan, out of King County. I will make a point here. She was a hardcore leftist before she ever became a judge, which is probably why Inslee appointed her. She had donated money to 2 of the Supreme Court justices currently, who were supposedly led to believe that they're going to actually be honestly hearing an appeal of this coming up to them. And her ruling, and by the way, Inslee actually came in the courtroom when she was going to do her ruling, and he sat in the back. She made eye contact with him. The fix was in before she ever started that hearing. The kabuki theater of the attorneys making their arguments really didn't matter. She'd already made her decision. She was told what to do. She knew what she had to do, and so that's what she did. Corrupt judges like that, when it comes to the political process, are legion in Washington State. That's the majority of them, in fact. It's quite rare to actually find a judge that's not that corrupt, and this is probably not a surprise, considering the only reason they're in their judicial position that they have right now is they were probably appointed by Inslee in the first place because, as we've discussed before, there's kind of a it's not even a kabuki theater. It's just the machine that operates right now in the judiciary is that if you're a judge getting close to retirement, you purposely retire right before the next, right in the midterm, so that the governor gets to appoint your replacement, and then your replacement gets to operate like an incumbent, which is a substantial advantage for incumbency when you go to hit the ballot box, especially with a judge. You can say, I am the incumbent judge. And so they've been doing this for decades. It's one of the reasons why we have such horrific and terrible judges almost universally throughout Washington State, because it doesn't matter if you're in a conservative area or a liberal area. If the judge is being appointed by the governor, which the majority of them are, and the voters don't have any idea that that's happened typically. And so next thing you know, you got a judge that's coming up, and they get a run for incumbency, and they get to be an incumbent judge for the next couple decades, and then they retire in time, and that's just how it goes. The judges also do a lot of dishonest stuff when it comes to ensuring that, you've got to remember, to run for judge, you have to have a law degree. There's a lot of restrictions on the judiciary as far as who can be in there. And so what happens is they prevent, if you're an attorney, you're most likely going to be an attorney trying to run for that judge seat. They basically will pretty much ostracize you for life if you ever challenge an incumbent judge. And so no big law firm wants their attorneys to run for judge, because they would lose every case they had before that judge in the future, and other judges, because they'll all work together on this. So it's kind of the scam that's going on in the judiciary. What you're really seeing with the decision on the overturning the natural gas bill is a continuation of the same story that we've been warning about now since I was an activist so long ago. Many of these judges that are appointed, they exist primarily just to protect government, to ensure that the people get no say in the role of government, and you're not really allowed to push back. They don't care about the Constitution at all. They don't care about the rule of law. And in fact, they've clearly identified 2 tracks of the legal system, one that they're going to apply to political insiders, and one that they're going to apply to you and I and regular people. And so it's not fair. It's very dishonest. It's also not terribly unique. I wish I could say it was, but it's happened before. We've gone through this process in decades and even centuries past since we've had a judiciary in America. We have had problems. If you don't believe me, go back and read the Dred Scott decision, or plenty of others that were done in the 1800s that were terrible decisions, Crookshanks, for example. And I talked about some of this when I did my story on this judge and the overturning of the 2066. Now, keep in mind, I know there's some appeal. It's going to take a little while for it to move up the food chain. But if you think that our Supreme Court is honest, you just haven't been paying attention. They're the worst, actually. So our Supreme Court is completely corrupted. And I mean, there'll probably be a few people that are semi-honest up there because there are some divisions that exist on the Supreme Court. But essentially, the pro-government side of this thing, it's more than partisanship. It's really this big support the blob and big government more than anything else. And that's what we have to fight against. Now, there are solutions to this, and I get into them in my video. I'll be launching that video tomorrow, so I don't know that I need to get into too many of them right now. If you want to ask specific questions on some of the solutions, I can get into it. But In fact, it looks like I got other questions coming up here about this, so let's just jump right into those. Jason, you got a question here. Thoughts on King County judge declaring natural gas initiative illegal due to having multiple topics? Why was an I-1639 struck down, and will the Seattle Supreme Court uphold it? Well, the Seattle Supreme Court, as I mentioned earlier, is completely corrupt, as they demonstrate with I-1639. That was the assault weapons ban, I'll put for lack of a better term, in common parlance for that bill. And the Supreme Court was exceptionally dishonest in the legal appeals on that bill because they do not apply the law equally. And it's just an Animal Farm reference in case you don't know, but all are equal, and some animals are a little bit more equal than others. So when it comes to the judges that we have, there is a whole category of people, and that's mainly you and I, anybody who dares question authority. We are not really going to be treated the same in the legal system than as somebody who is pushing whatever leftist agenda is pushed at that time. There are some exceptions to this. Some. They're limited. I'm concerned that even those sometimes are put at risk. And to some extent, the concern with the judiciary that I have on the political side of things also overlaps a bit with the judiciary's abuse of the discretion that they have when it comes to dealing with criminals, because they've been particularly soft on violent criminals and looking for any and every excuse to release more bad guys out early, and in turn creating more victims of crime, because despite the delusions of whatever flavor of the month theory that they have, and when I say they, I'm really referring to the judges, the hardened criminals tend to just repeat committing crimes. I mean, you just saw that recently with a guy, sorry, I'm forgetting his name, Levy, I think was his name, and the guy that Inslee just pardoned, who literally testified in the legislature trying to reduce sentences hours before he gets arrested as one of the primary fentanyl drug dealers for Snohomish County. And that was after serving 17 years in jail for attempting, back in 2002, for attempting to hold up a drug den. And so he's in jail. Inslee lets him out early. He becomes a BLM treasurer, Black Lives Matter treasurer, of course. He becomes this leftist activist. And he's got what appears to be his life turned around. You might disagree with his policies, but it didn't look like he was out committing more crimes, and little did we know, it turns out he was. Stolen guns and fentanyl and cocaine and drugs, and that was apparently how he made his living. He wasn't able to make enough, I guess, being just a regular leftist activist grifting out the taxpayers like the rest of them, and he decided he had to be greedy and become the fentanyl kingpin for Snohomish County. So I just don't, this just continually repeats itself. This is no different than the theories that the judiciary had in the 50s and 60s, when they also took a similar approach back then. And that was, it was in vogue because they did the same thing in Europe, where they were releasing these violent criminals, and of course they go out and become prolific criminals. And that was really what led to James Q. Wilson's studies on crime and punishment, and understanding the broken windows theory and all the stuff that led to the reforms that occurred mostly in America, not everywhere, but you saw it in New York, you saw it in Washington State, especially in the 90s, where 3 strikes and you're out laws came into effect, minimum sentencing laws, and the crackdown on using broken windows community policing theory in New York City and elsewhere. It really did reduce crime. However, despite the clear and obvious evidence that how you solve these problems, the vogue approach, this is totally led by the left, is to get those violent criminals back out into society as quick as they can to create more victims and to support the criminals. It's starker now than ever, actually. It's not so much the policies that are starker, because we've seen that before, but the partisan nature of where these theories come from is starker now than it's ever been. The Democrats have set themselves up with their judges as clearly pro-criminal caucus. So the pro-criminal caucus has decided they wanted, now most of their dumb bills they had in Olympia died. They didn't get through the legislative session. But you're still going to have these judges who lean that way, who even testified stupidly on these bills in Olympia that way. You know that you'll never get a fair hearing if you're in front of them, if you are identified in any way as a conservative, or maybe if you go out and commit a mass shooting, then maybe they'll let you go. But other than that, if you're a conservative, you're going to get in trouble, and your cause is not going to. You can't expect to get a reasonable rule of law there. So there's a bunch of people asking questions about this judge. Let's jump into a bunch of them. Brian Smith again, as a response to these radical federal judges, could we start a class action lawsuit naming the judge? Now, this is an interesting question, and this is slightly different because you're talking about federal judges here versus state judges. And I've been talking about state judges because we do have the ability to remove state judges through an election process. It is rare, 1 in 500 races at the most that I could even think of, where you actually get somebody legitimately organized, recruited, and ready to run for judge. And you can win judicial races if you do a good job recruiting somebody in advance and getting them willing to take that chance of running. And believe me, it's a chance, because you probably have a law degree and it's going to end your legal career if you run for office against a judge. So you need to win. If you win, different story, right? But you have to win. And it really is important for us to start recruiting judicial candidates and running serious campaigns. It can't be this mealy-mouthed, loosey-goosey campaign. That's just the path to lose and get all the downside of it. It has to be aggressive. And the judges that, when I say aggressive, it doesn't mean you do dumb things, but these judges are determining who they are with lots of endless, stupid decisions that they're making. The Sandra Widlan judge last Friday defined herself as a hardcore leftist activist, but she's probably also got plenty of other examples. She's been on the bench since 2018. So, and she ran unopposed in 2018, unopposed in 2020, and unopposed in 2024. Nobody ran against her. So there was no option that anybody had. In fact, there were only a couple races in King County that were contested at all. And you can't tell me out of their 40 some odd Superior Court judges in that county that they were all good. We know that most of them are actually horrific. So running good people against these judges is super important, but you have to run real campaigns. And forget this nonpartisan stuff, because at this point in time, it's become super partisan. We've got a class of judges there that are never going to enforce the law equally or consistently. They've committed themselves to unequal treatment under the law, and they're determined to implement it that way. So we have to remove people who approach destroying the rule of law in this manner. And it's going to take recruiting good people and identifying that in advance. But the federal judges are a little different because, again, they're all appointed. You have no option ever from a voting standpoint. You can impeach federal judges. I don't think it's as easy as people think it is, because you do have to get through a process to get that done. And maybe that's what we're going to see on a lot of the current conflict between the executive branch and the judicial branch, which is going on right now back in D.C. But without that, even there, we can make a lot of headway at our local, state level in the Superior Court judges and the appellate court judges and even the Supreme Court judges. We just had a Supreme Court race where a good person missed it by a teeny amount of votes. Even with our screwed up election system in Washington State, we almost elected a good judge. It wasn't that far off. So running serious campaigns where you're actually willing to expose how corrupt and bad the people are that you're running against is going to lead into a good direction. We can't continually just let these judges make horrible decisions with no pushback. Now then, the second thing is Republicans in the legislature should start proposing judicial reform bills. I realize they may not get hearings and they may not go anywhere, but there'll be shots across the bow and an indication to the Superior Court judges that we're aware of the corruption and that there will be some legislative consequences at some point. You can still run initiatives or at least propose initiatives and start experimenting which idea would be the best. Get them out there, run surveys on them. It doesn't cost a lot to get the initiatives in the system, and then see how the judges deal with implementing some of those initiatives. Will they try to shoot them down? Sure. Is the system rigged against you? Absolutely. Don't think it's a fair process. It never has been and it never will be. But at least if we approach it effectively, I think we can start to put some pressure on the judges right now who feel no pressure at all from us. None. They feel zero pressure because we don't run candidates, we don't run campaigns seriously at all, and we're not giving exposure to how bad these judges really are, and we have to start doing that. Brian Smith again, and it might be a positive message to President Trump to see this type of lawsuit coming from the citizens of Washington. Yeah, I just don't know. I think it's very hard for citizens to run initiatives. We could do, you could definitely, and it's a lot less expensive, collect 50,000 signatures and send them back to D.C. where we want to investigate certain judges or replace certain judges. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's absolutely going to happen. I think sometimes you can still go through the process and without an absolute guarantee of an outcome and make quite a bit of headway on it, I believe. And I think we have to do more of that. Let's see. I'm going down to questions, guys, not the commentary. So let me skip down through here. TBW. I don't know, actually. Somebody had this question here. There we go. What is TBW? I have no idea what you're talking about, so you'll have to let me know what the context in which you're putting that. If Ferguson won the nomination in 2028, how would it work out? You mean if Bob Ferguson won the nomination for presidency? Well, I mean, I'm sure that he would try to, in Ferguson's mind, at least according to the staff that haven't bailed out of Ferguson's administration yet, because he's had multiple staff members leave in the last few days. He doesn't really think that he could become president. He thinks he could be a vice presidential candidate, and then that would set him up to be a president in the future. That's really the discussion that his internal at the Ferguson camp, that's what they've had. So how likely is that? I don't know. I mean, the human capacity for self-delusion seems to be pretty high with politicians in particular, and so there seems to be a delusion about, especially if you win an election and you think then that therefore everybody must love you. It's no guarantee, right? And especially when it's a softball election in Washington State, it's pretty much a meaningless election in the sense of how popular you are. Inslee won several elections, and less than 1% of America thought he was ever worth even considering for president. And Ferguson it would probably do even worse than that. So I don't see him going anywhere past it. Ferguson's other problem that he has, which many people watching this video may not necessarily be aware of, is less his pressure from people who are on the Republican side or who believe in liberty and freedom. His bigger threat right now, and it's a more immediate threat and really probably more impactful as to why his staff is leaving, is the way the left is attacking him and believe that he's out of touch or he's not crazy enough for them. And there's a genuine conflict occurring in Olympia between Bob Ferguson, who wants to have a political future, and some of the more nihilistic sort of approach that these lefties have had in Olympia. That's why you've had this temper tantrum on the legislature where they propose all these dumb ideas, most of which aren't going anywhere, but Ferguson doesn't want to have to veto stupid ideas. You know, with Frank Chop passing away recently, the former Speaker of the House, longest-serving Speaker of the House, Democrat, been there forever, 20-some-odd years as a Speaker. He, one of the things the left didn't like about him is he kind of ruled with an iron fist in the legislature, and he would kill a lot of bills based on his assessment of statewide politics. It's the best I could explain it. I mean, sure, there was special interest pushing him in the background. Not an honest guy. He wasn't. He was definitely corrupt, but he had some attachment to the real world that seems to be tenuous for a lot of the newer legislators in Olympia that are Democrats, who just seem so out of touch and so crazy that the more unhinged and spun up they get, the crazier they appear. I don't think you would have seen those things come out of Frank Chop would have stopped a lot of that stuff from ever going anywhere, and with him, and that was one of the reasons why the lefties didn't like him. So with him leaving, and now he recently passed away, you see there's really everything's kind of out of control. Jenkins is trying to be an adult in the room, but Stonier's going to undermine her. It's just this huge fight in the floor, and the Republicans have actually, to their credit, and I think it's important to give credit where credit's due because it's difficult when you're in kind of a small minority this way. They've done a pretty good job linking arms and kind of being focused on coming after some of the more absurd and stupid bills that have been proposed. And the contrast is so stark where you have reasonable, sane people and then just unhinged crazies. So the unhinged crazies aren't going to be the ones in the end who are going to win more votes. Bob Ferguson is not a total idiot. I may totally disagree with him. I know he hates me, but you got to be honest about the guy. He's not a total clown. He knows that you can't be crazy like that and still win a political majority in the long run. He knows that you lose that, even with that recent survey that shows people in California, of all places, would be interested in voting for a Republican governor. If you do continue to vote on crazy and support crazy even in Washington State, even in Oregon, everything, you do lose support long run. And the Democrats don't seem to be, the Democrat leadership, the party leadership, not necessarily rank and file, but the Democrat Party leadership, and certainly the people they put in Olympia, they have no clue. So there's a delusional, out-of-touch angle that they seem to be taking, and they're just getting angry that their narrative's not sticking. So, that's just, I see. Now I understand how to answer this question. But anyway, that's what I think is happening there. Okay, go Cat Go. I did not say TBW, I meant TVW, which is the equivalent of like public broadcasting in Washington State. If you know who the lieutenant governor is, Denny Heck, this was his company, so that he could claim that he was actually an entrepreneur. He wasn't. It was just handed to him after he left the legislature back in the 70s, early 80s. This was his multi-million-dollar guaranteed not to fail contract that he got with the state that he could grift off of and become a multimillionaire. Now he's your lieutenant governor. The funny thing is, Denny Heck and I probably disagree on a lot, but he's also one of those people that he may be corrupt, but he's sane, and he's probably looking at Olympia as well and wondering where the crazies, how he's going to have to deal with the crazy stuff that is coming out of the Seattle crew. But TVW is essentially when you go watch hearings and you see the official video of the legislative hearings in the Senate and the House, and then they also do like roving camera teams that'll go around and record hearings like in other parts of the state, and so that's where that is. Senate Bill 1163, don't have that one memorized. You have to tell me which bill that is. I do not remember everything by numbers. And then one of the problems that I have found over the years is that they recycle these numbers every legislative session. So you'll remember this number on a bill from some period of time in the past, and you got to try to bring it back to what the bill is this cycle compared to what it was last time. Okay, so this is the one about enhancing requirements relating to the purchase, transfer, and possession of firearms. And I think this is the bill that, let me see, it's had a ton of amendments. Where are we at right now? There's a hearing coming up on March 25th in the Senate at 8 a.m., March 27th at 10:30 a.m. on this. So it's still there. It seems like it's still alive. And let me look at the bill status at a glance. The Senate's really hanging it up right now, and it's not on the floor calendar yet, so it's still in committee, and that's where it's at. It did get through the House side, but not to the Senate side yet, which is surprising because it is a Senate-originated bill, so the House version of it's what came out. So I don't have a lot of information that's different right now, and I probably won't for a few more days. Let's see. Niall Adamson, the president can abolish the judge's position. Impeachment takes 2/3 vote. Can the people abolish the judge's positions? Oh, that is a good question, and that's a question at a federal level, and I haven't looked into that from a legal standpoint, whether he truly can do that. Judges, in order to expand the federal judiciary, and by the way, there's been a quite legitimate argument that we're actually short of the necessary judges, particularly in the appellate level side of things. I know we are at the state level, but I think on the federal side, there's been a problem with it. If you wonder why these court cases take years and years and years, part of it is the delay caused by the backlog of hearings in the appellate side of the process. So there's been some pretty reasonable discussion on expanding the judiciary, the federal judiciary in that lower level. It's not the Supreme Court packing sort of thing that we're talking about. We're just talking about adding more judges at the appellate level on the federal side and also at the federal district courts. And there's probably a need for that, to be honest. And but it does take the legislature. They have to approve that expansion. And it's been the legislature that's historically held that up. So I'm really not sure that they can just come in and abolish that position. The president can abolish it, just carte blanche. I don't think that's true. Remember, there's been a whole bunch of different judges federally that have put nationwide restrictions at an unprecedented level in the Trump administration. Now, it raises quite a significant question, and it's probably going to really do a lot of damage to the judiciary, doing it in such a wholesale and ridiculous way. If you look through all of these holds or federal judges who basically suspend the federal policies, some of them may have some pretty good legal arguments, but that's not the majority of them. Many of them are ridiculous, and so the ones that have legitimate legal arguments, let's duke it out. Let's figure out where that line needs to be defined, because we may very well be treading in areas that the law has never been fully defined in. I can accept that. However, you can't have them do it to every single policy that's coming out, which is what's happening now, when some of those policies are very clearly within the realm of the executive branch, and they've been exercised by previous presidents with no problem. So it becomes then a very troubling scenario, because you're destroying the credibility of the judiciary, which none of these judges probably care about, the ones that have been appointed by Obama or maybe Clinton even, or certainly anybody that Biden managed or his auto pen put in. So those people, they don't care. They don't care if they destroy the Judiciary Committee. It's all about political power, and that's what this is a big power play. The real question is going to be what happens when it gets to the Supreme Court in some of these key cases, and how backlogged are we going to be with Supreme Court decisions on those issues, and will they respond because they're annoyed at the sheer volume of all these issues. Usually the Supreme Court likes, if they can, to kick the can down the road and say, identify process issues or something else. I'm not sure that that's going to be the case here. At some point in time, the Supreme Court's going to have to step in and rule on these issues. And, I don't think it's going to go, it won't go consistently in one direction or the other, most likely. They'll split the baby a few times, but you may have them reject a lot of the abuse that I think we're seeing at the federal court system. I'm a little more concerned about the state level right now, but that's just it. Beth Lindman, with the staggering number of new taxes and bills that will crush most Washingtonians and judges overturning what we voted for, do we truly have any chance when they have a supermajority? And the answer to that is yes, because proposing stupidity doesn't make it law. Any clown can propose stupidity. They've been doing that for centuries in America. It doesn't make it law. And I realize there's a lot of confusion out there when people hear about a bill that's proposed. Just because the Democrats proposed a lot of stupid bills, and they did, doesn't make them instantly law. Even bills that get out of a committee doesn't make them instantly law. Many, as we've already seen, many bad bills have died. Now, this recent proposal of all these new taxes in a big bloated budget bill is something that I think Ferguson in particular is resistant to. It's not because he's a good guy. He didn't suddenly reform himself. He's just pissed himself that he has to deal. He doesn't want to have to deal with justifying that down the road. And so there's some real issues about that. Now, the supermajority thing does come into play if it's something that the Democrats have really decided to totally commit to. But as we've seen, a lot of these bills have kind of dropped off because they haven't fully been committed to all of them. And some of them are quite confusing, and it's not clear how they'd be implemented. And, we have to see where it goes from there. What we can guarantee, though, is that our judges won't. I think it's a big mistake to rely on the judges to do the right thing. I mean, federally, we got a reasonable chance probably in federal court on some of the stuff, the crazier stuff, but you can't count on a Superior Court judge to ever do anything honestly in Washington. I think that's a super big risk right now when it comes to anything political. I think they're fine if you've got a parking ticket or speeding ticket, or you were caught for jaywalking. I think they'll probably be okay in that scenario. But I don't think that you're going to I would never put any trust in the court system for that. We do need to do some reform. If I was in the Republican side, I'd be proposing bill after bill after bill right now to reform the judiciary. It doesn't mean that it has a hearing, but it sends a message to the judges that there's something wrong and that everybody's starting to recognize it. And the judges are much more sensitive than you realize to public pressure. Remember, there has never, ever been, in my lifetime in Washington State, not once, has there ever been significant public pressure on the judges here, ever. There was a little bit in the 90s over the soft on crime problems that they had, and that's why the citizens did the 3 strikes you're out law as an initiative in 94. But other than that, there's really been no pressure. These judges have been able to operate with nobody identifying who they are, why their decisions are terrible, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's the part that needs to change a lot. We really have to put a lot of attention on how bad they really are. Go Cat Go, since an attorney no longer needs to pass the bar exam in Washington State, does that mean that a judge would not need to pass the bar exam? That is an excellent question. And I don't have an answer for that, because I think you've got a reasonably good argument that you could run for judge and not have to pass the bar now. So that's pretty interesting. There's other things that have restricted judges, that have been placed as restrictions. I mean, it's a very corrupt kind of club, keeping it everybody in the club process. So I don't know. We'll have to see what's going to go. Jason Fisher, question, what's your thoughts on Seattle time? On Seattle Times? Oh, Times, I think that's what you mean is Seattle Times. Not supporting the gun permit bill due to how expensive it will be to obtain a permit, $200 estimated by them. I actually didn't see that at the Seattle Times. It's actually the ones that came out in opposition to it. It'd be unusual for them. There's usually no restriction on your freedoms that they don't support, but it could be that they've gotten somebody there who accidentally read the state constitution, or is somehow they found a sane person at the Seattle Times. I didn't know there was anybody left there that was. They'll probably lose their job for writing that. I'm sure they're attacked by it, but we will see. The permit thing, it's so obviously constitutional that obviously it invites a federal litigation 2-3 years down the road. It gets thrown out, but we'll have to see. Keep going here. More questions, and I don't want to skip any of your questions because it looks like there's a lot of them, and I need to get down to these. I'm going to skip the commentary here, try to get right to questions. Sharon Cobble, what is a good website we can go to that will tell us the leanings of state judges? That is a good question. There's never been a good site in Washington State until very recently. Last year I did a video about this, about Full Court Press, which is an effort to recruit judges who are sane and honest and actually believe in the rule of law to run for office. And it's very new. They just started a little while ago. Full Court Press would be a good place I would start, but I don't think they're rating all the judges yet. One thing you can do is go to the Progressives candidate rating website, and anybody they say is good, is terrible. So that's one of my shortcuts on how to figure out whether somebody's worth supporting or not. If the progressives like them, they're probably pure poison, and you don't want anything to do with them, and they're definitely corrupt and they're definitely dishonest, so they're not the right person. So that's one of the things that you can do. Daniel Arneson, how about, since they're corrupt, we charge them and make consequences for their unconstitutional actions? Yeah, that sounds great. I hear people say that stuff all the time. There's no practical way to do that. You can file judicial ethics complaints. I think I've done some of those myself. I know I've done some research on it. I think I've filed a couple of those in the past. But if the system's rigged against you in that process, and it is a little bit, because they don't want to find problems. For a judge to get in trouble on the Judicial Ethics Board, you either have to be like Judge Flood out of Kitsap, so egregiously, insanely incompetent that your staff quits twice over at the Kitsap Superior or District Court, and so you made a mockery of the whole system, and everybody's angry. You have to be that bad before they're willing to actually discipline you at all. And to their credit, they disciplined her and they took her off the bench. Or you have to be a Republican and make some little mistake, and they'll use that as their excuse to try to take you off the bench. Remember, that whole system is set up by the good old boys that are leftists and progressive-y sort of wokesters, so they're not going to be honest in that process. And you can't change that board until you've elected enough good judges around the state to then, because they appoint judges to that position, and it just takes a bit of work on this. Let's see. T.Z. Burton, Julie Barrett reported that 105 bills in the current session passed with no opposition. Can you address why we should vote for Republicans instead of Dems? This concerns me. Yeah, probably because most of those bills aren't very significant. You have to remember, So you get about, now this year's a little bit less, but normally in a given legislative session, you're going to have roughly 3,000 bills by the time the next session's done. We operate on a 2-year biennium. So there's a long session, which we're in now, short sessions next spring, or late winter, early spring. About 3,000 bills get proposed. 500 of them or so end up on the governor's desk. That I'm using rough math. It might be 300. I've not really seen it much higher than 500 before, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. 90% of them have no opposition because they're so insignificant. Whose name is on the bridge, right? We're in Timbuktu. Whether the state's going to be called the Evergreen State officially, the official bird of the state, the tweak on a very small piece of legislation that an incompetent group of politicians at some point in time in the past screwed up so badly and didn't realize it was in direct conflict with 7 other laws, and so they have to go in and tweak that because somewhere somebody lost a lawsuit or it was identified as a problem, and they fix it, and it's really not controversial. That is the vast majority of those bills. I'm unaware, and Julie Barrett would have to show me if there's any of those bills that actually have some significant nexus to anything that anybody really cares about that's really significant. There is a lot of mundane work that goes on in government that doesn't make the headlines. You won't hear any ex-posts about it. And it's just, if you sit there, though, and you read through the legislation, you'll think, oh, that's very minor. I'd probably vote for that, too. Now, bad things can still happen that way, but for the most part, those aren't the bills that have an impact in your life. So that's why you're going to see 105 bills in the current session that passed with no opposition, because there's really not a lot to oppose. Sometimes bills do sneak through that process, but that's how it basically works, and I'm happy to, if anybody wants to throw me more questions about that. Bob in Washington, D.C., would that be a okay or what? I don't know. I don't quite know what you're talking about there. Probably jumped into a midterm conversation there. Jason Fisher, question: Colorado House passed fixed magazine rifle mandate. The permit will be run by Parks and Wildlife, which is a shell game. It's illegal. And will the Trump administration cut funding? Boy, they sure should. Colorado, Maine, Illinois, New York, Washington, Oregon, California, we're inviting the feds to cut off all the money coming to our state. It'd probably be wise for them to do that. You've heard me talk about the inevitable litigation that needs to happen against the Department of Licensing, which I think will happen based on what the feds have done in New York. Washington State Department of Licensing will lose that case, and it'll just demonstrate that we are violating the law even worse than New York. And that has a big chain reaction effect, as I've discussed in the past videos on that topic. We still don't officially, at least, no, it could have happened today, but I haven't checked my phone on this, but we haven't officially had a new appointment to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Seattle or Spokane that I'm aware of yet. I think there's a fight going on right now. Part of it's going to be on Republican fight. Part of it's going to be the 2 federal senators, Cantwell and Murray, who are probably not liking the initial list of attorneys that the Republicans are considering, the Trump administration's considering under Pam Bondi to appoint out here. And as I've talked about before, the blue slip would rule, which is kind of a prerogative. It's like, it's not a law. It's just that senators from states have been given the ability to blue slip the appointments of people they don't like, or not give a blue slip on somebody. And for the most part, the Senate, which they're the ones that vote on approving the judges or not, they have not approved. They would typically not be appointing the. They don't want to step on the toes of that, because remember, Republican senators from Oklahoma or South Dakota, they also use the blue slip process to keep out lefty appointments in their state. So in our state, we've ensured that we've had the worst federal judges possible that could be appointed, whether it was by Trump or anybody else here, because the blue slips utilized by the federal senators, or that also has applied to U.S. attorneys. So even when you do appoint a Republican U.S. attorney, they've historically been weak and wimpy and useless and unwilling to actually do anything that matters. My sense right now, currently with the Trump administration, that's not what they want, and so there's probably a bit of fighting behind the scenes right now, and that's why you haven't seen a U.S. attorney appointed yet. I don't know how it's going to play out yet. I don't have any super secret special access to information, But I think that's one of the battles that's going on right now. Julie Anderson, I feel like one of our problems as a party that we spread our resources too thin. Why do we support candidates in districts that have no chance? What do you think? Well, there's obviously concentration of resources, and the Republican Party is generally going to be effective if they concentrate on a couple of key races. If you've heard Brian Haywood out there talking about political focused use of funding and PAC funding, where they should focus, about picking up 3 House seats and 2 Senate seats each cycle, that's where you can raise enough money to focus on those areas and start flipping seats into the sane territory. I think that there's a good argument on that. You also you have this tiered approach, really. And for instance, even the judges, I was just talking about recruiting and running sane judges. You pick the 10 most horrific judges that Washington State has. We've got plenty to choose from. Won't be hard to find 10. And you pick those 10, you say, we're going to run really good candidates to replace those 10 judges. And we're going to run media campaigns. We're going to actually run real races, and we're going to replace those 10 judges. You probably won't win them all, but you could win a big chunk of them. It sends a message to the judges. And people have to remember, and I don't know why, this is significant, okay? You may not win them all. The people that are incumbents, the bad guys, the current Supreme Court justices, I did a hearing with them. They did a public forum up in Snohomish County when I was at the Freedom Foundation. This had to have been like 2014. And I remember going up, it was a rare opportunity to actually talk to a bunch of Supreme Court judges in a social setting. So it was kind of interesting. And one thing that came up is this huge paranoid concern that they obviously had, including some of them that are currently sitting on the Supreme Court today. They were freaked out over the fact that 10 years earlier, the BIW, back when they had some resources, had actually run judicial candidates for the Supreme Court and had actually had some win. And it freaked them out. And they still bring it up a decade later, 2 decades later, right? It's still the biggest thing that's ever happened to them. They remember that. And so putting that pressure on them, starting to run now, the only thing I wish is we'd started 10 years ago. If we did, we wouldn't be in the same position that we're at now. But people like, on our side, and I say our side, I'm talking about freedom and liberty-oriented sort of folk, there is an addiction to losing problem that we do have sometimes. Some people like to lose, and you have to remember that, they would never admit it, but they do. They enjoy doing things that make them lose. And some people are just addicted to it. They have some kind of attraction to losing. They like being perpetual victims, and so losing is just their approach to politics. And I think that's going to be one of the issues that people have to be aware of. We're going to have people that want to win, and we have to recruit candidates that actually have a plan to win, not just a delusional, tilting at windmills sort of campaign by people who need a drool cup to function in public, or an ego plan that they plan on running just to simply have a podcast in the future. I don't know. Those are the problems that we really have to work on. John Anthony, so I must have missed something. I said permit to purchase a firearm. There was another comment here that somebody had about 1163, the live fire training approved by WSP prior to purchasing firearms, which is ridiculous, but nevertheless, obviously anything they can throw up to make it harder for you to be able to defend yourself, and anything they can do to make it easier for violent criminals to get out early. This is so similar, I have to tell you, especially the treatment of violent crime, to the theories that were floating around in judicial circles. It really started in the 1930s, but it was not the first, but it's one of the more recent progressive waves into the judiciary that started back in that 30s era, in the 40s and the 50s and 60s, and implemented it in public policy. And that's why you had the big crime waves of the late 60s, 70s, and 80s, was really a direct result of this. We know where these policies go. We've got plenty of modern, reasonably documented tracking for public safety issues. So we'll just have to see where it goes. And that bill's terrible. Any of these anti-gun bills are bad. The interesting thing is that most of them already died, which surprises me a little bit. So this seems to be the one they want to hang their hat on, and it's the weakest in some ways of the bunch, but it's also the most obviously unconstitutional at a federal level and at a state level, but we don't have an honest state Supreme Court anymore. So there's some work that needs to be done here. Ray Bateman, hi, can Trump or Pam Bondi help us with all this corruption? And the answer is yes, they can. But also, I think I want to point out, Washington State is considered backwater USA. May not feel that way to you and I because we live here and we love it, and this is our family, this is our home. We know the benefits. And Washington State is an awesome state. Despite the fact that we may have clowns in the political class, Washington State has a lot of benefits to it. I feel like I should do like a whole video series on just what makes Washington awesome, just on a macro level of the state. The politics are a problem when you have bad politicians there, but there's a lot of natural benefits and historical benefits that Washington State can give us and make this the best place to live in America. However, the political class does want to make it the worst. So that's what we're fighting here. That's really the dynamics. What is being done with Act Blue is going to help us a lot. The federal election reform, as that rolls out, that's going to help us a lot. Cutting federal funding off to our state, mostly that's going to help us, especially with some of the colleges and universities that are just useless garbage pits. They should not exist. Evergreen State College, right? That's just an embarrassment to humanity. And so we need to shut off places like that. But anyway, we'll just have to see. Karis Armstrong, are you sure that Bob is smart? Because he certainly does not come off as being smart in any way. He's just another Inslee temper tantrum when he doesn't get his way. Yeah, when Ferguson feels threatened, which I think is just rare, he freaks out in a way that's so irrational that it's, for anybody who's lived in the real world, you're wondering what the heck's going on with this guy. Now, that doesn't make him look smart. It makes him look petty and vindictive and weird. And I'm sure he's a weirdo in real life. He seems to be that way. And most people that know him personally tell me that he is. The challenge that he faces right now, and it's a legitimate challenge. Listen, we're not friends, Bob Ferguson. Anybody watching this channel, you know the history that I've had with Bob Ferguson. He does not like me very much at all. He doesn't like me at all, and he's certainly had his share of complaints about me, whether it's me filing the complaints against him, the multiple Bob Fergusons that ran for a short period of time back in the last year's filing week, or other reasons. He's just not enjoyed having me around the state. So I'm sure if he could take me out, he would. But at the same time, you have to look at it from his position and what he's dealing with right now. He just lost Michael Webb and several other people out of his policy staff. Now, Michael Webb was, when I went back and did a little more research on the guy, it looks like he probably did have there's probably some legitimacy behind the stories. Whether he's truly, the Democrats, the lefty Democrats are claiming that he was sexually harassed people, but it might be even worse than that. He may legitimately have been an abuser of women of some kind. I don't know, but rumors seems to back that up a little bit, that there's some legitimacy to that claim. Remember, Bob Ferguson protected him for quite a while because he helped Bob Ferguson with his election. But the fact that the Democrats, they had people like that all over their party. So the fact that they let this guy who's been in there forever be this abusive and then suddenly pick this time right now in the middle of legislative session to take him out and put the pressure on Ferguson to lose his entire legislative staff. And they weren't being secret about it. They were open. I mean, Yasmin was coming out, the representative from Tacoma, Yasmin Trudeau, was coming out and openly attacking Bob Ferguson's, not directly Bob Ferguson, but his staff, and doing it under her own name in the paper is something that a bitter, vindictive Bob Ferguson would not forget and would hold against you forever. The fact that she's willing to do it means to me that the Democrats, at least the left wing of the Democrats, have decided to take Bob Ferguson out. They're going to primary him, and they're going to do everything they can to hurt Bob Ferguson while he's in governor right now. They are absolutely going to do that. And now, normally, in a normal setting like that, Republicans would be prepared then to run a strong candidate to take advantage of this infighting. Maybe we will, maybe we don't, but there's an opportunity to do that. But right now, the long knives are out inside the Democrat Party, and they're stabbing Ferguson in the back. Ferguson's probably having to regroup and figure out how he can deal with the crazies. And he's worried that the crazies are going to make him look too crazy to either continue on his political aspirations or genuinely hurt the state, which basically has the same impact on him. So There's a lot of important stuff that's going on. John Anthony, you had another good comment here. I want to jump in on this right now. Public comment until tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Good point. Anybody watching this video, get online, pull up 1163 and any of these other bills and add your public comment to them. You may think that they ignore you, and they certainly want to, but they run the numbers. They know what's going on. It's put a lot of pressure on them. Frankly, I think it's what killed the per mile tax idea. I think it's what's killed several of these other bad Democrat ideas that they've had in the legislative session already. Anyway, there's a lot of drama coming on. And you can put a lot more pressure on them if you are willing to send those questions in. I'm going to try to be punching through these questions, guys. There's a lot of questions here. Nick Marenchi, if I'm pronouncing that right. Do you think by cutting bugged Bob Ferguson wants to look a little more moderate and then run for president? Yeah, I do, and I repeat myself what I said earlier. Probably not run directly for president, probably put himself in a position where somebody would want to. He saw Inslee basically blow up in Inslee's campaign. Ferguson is probably delusional, but he doesn't think that he even has Inslee's national attention or support, so he would set himself up to be a vice presidential candidate. That's really what he's trying to do. When will Daniel Arnson, when will Doge come here and audit Washington State, or will they? Well, remember, their focus on federal issues they're already affecting Washington State in small ways here and there on the federal side of things. The Doge training classes that I plan on putting on, as I mentioned in the beginning of the studio, 5 to 7 of these classes, I think, around the state over the next few months. It's really to teach people how to do most of the Doge-like sort of work yourself. Again, to inspire federal investigation, people want somebody else to do all the work for them, and that's not typically how it works. We're going to have to come in and do a lot of our own work and hand it to the feds on a silver platter. There's some basic skills you can develop using the Public Records Act and whistleblowers and other basic techniques to start to dig out some of the worst things. Now, you've seen, if you've been watching Ari Hoffman or Doge Washington online, you see them posting some of the stuff out there. I want to teach a couple hundred people in Washington State. I'd love to teach a couple thousand to go out and be able to do that themselves and to feed into that hopper, and that's going to help us with inspiring the feds to cut off funds to a lot more of the state agencies that squander the money and use it on dumb stuff like that. It really does help. Lynn, you got a question? Well, it's not a question here. Please do a podcast on the Alien Enemies Act. It was the one that did not end in 1800 and it's still on the books. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm the best person on that. I could look it up and probably do it reasonable, but I don't know that I'm the best guy to run that out there, but I'd be happy to cover it. Let's see where it goes, because there's plenty of other issues that seem to keep coming up. Dropping down here, let's see. Who opened the gates of Toledo? Well, that's not going to be a helpful question because I can't really help you there. Jason, you got a question here. Will we see massive tax increases, or will Sideshow Bob fight against them? Well, I don't know how many of them would even come to the legislature as drafted right now, regardless of whatever hype and drama you see out there. Sometimes, and particularly the inexperienced ignorance on display in Olympia, is generating an unusual pushback behind the scenes, and you're not seeing it necessarily. But remember, Bill Gates and a lot of these other lefty so-called business guys, like they had been in business, but they seem to have lost touch of what it takes to run a business now. They spend their money destroying the environment that allowed them to run their business in the first place. Some of them are starting to wake up. You're already seeing it, actually, surprisingly, from people that I would consider lefty, or at least on the left side of the equation, but they still have to live in reality, right? Which is not our legislators. The Democrat legislators have no obligation to live in any kind of reality at all. And so they're in this delusional kind of feeding frenzy. But the big dollars that have been behind them forever still have to live in reality somewhere along the way. Somewhere there they have to match and hit a point where reality exists, as much as they may want to deny it. And I think what's happening is a bunch of them will be pushing with their lobbyists and other contacts. They'll be talking about how there won't be any more fundraisers in Bellevue or Redmond or Kirkland or Seattle anymore for people pushing the more absurd and crazy side of the equation for these ideas. And as those messages seep into the thick heads of some of these even crazy lefties, at some point in time they'll realize realize that they're running out of money, our money, right now, and they may run out of all of their money even. And so that's going to be what pushes back on some of those taxes. Now, they're going to have some, but that get through. I just can't tell for sure which ones. A lot of them, I think they're just thrown at the wall to see. It gives them some talking points with their leftist cadres and their comrades that are out there getting paid or running out of money anyway from ActBlue, getting paid to show up at rallies or protests or burn down Teslas. And so as that money's drying up, they still have to kind of throw bones out there to the crowd and make them think that they care about them. Now, remember, a lot of these politicians, unfortunately, I don't even think they necessarily know what they believe. They're just the narrative control and repetition, where it's identical to each other, implies that they have no idea what they believe. They're just doing whatever they're told to do. And so we'll just have to see, we see where it goes. Let's see. Brian B., you should definitely make those. What makes Washington State great? I think I want to. I've been talking about doing this for a while. I did this years ago with some friends of mine, quite a few years ago. And now I feel like, especially as somebody I used to travel around the country a lot, and I don't tend to talk about personal stuff so much on this channel, but I'll do a little bit of it right now. I lived in New York City going to college as a student there. I grew up kind of rurally in Washington. I love Washington State, fifth generation Washingtonian, for those who don't know, and big family that spread all over the state, but they've been here a long, long time. And mostly we lived on farms. Washington State's great. Living in rurally in Washington State, I can't imagine a better place to be. It's been a great place to raise kids too. It's where I would like to raise grandkids in this state. There's a lot of awesome things about Washington. Just because we have a dumb political class doing stupid things, those impacts are biggest in the cities, but they definitely are issues that can be fixed. But it's worth talking about the state overall. And so I do want to probably do a series about that, and I'm assuming I'll be doing some videos like that. I am seeing a ton of commentary, guys, trying to find the questions here, because I am looking at lots of commentary back and forth, and I don't think there's too many of those that are questions. But it is getting to be almost that time. So since most of you guys were just arguing with each other there, and I don't see too many questions there, but I will say, since this is always appreciated, thank you for saying thank you. That's always good. Always appreciate that. Also, audit them all. I agree. Everybody needs to be audited, and what we have to do is basically teach more people on how to do that themselves. And I'll give you just a basic sense. So I spoke at the Thurston County Republican Lincoln Day dinner on Saturday. It was up by the Olympia Airport in one of the hangars, and it was well attended. Brandy Cruz spoke there, and it looked to me like they raised a bit of money. I helped with the paddle raise. But the one thing in talking to some of the legislators there, Matt Marshall, for example, Travis Kocher, Dan Griffey was there as well. And those are the three main legislators who were there that I talked to. And we had some conversations. And the one thing that you can see is these guys are trying to do the right thing. They're fighting back. They're doing hard work in the legislature. It is harder when you're in the minority, and I know that it is. So, but the one thing that helps is to find different techniques and strategy to push back. There's no magic solution. There was a speaker there who mentioned that nothing is going to replace the fact that you have to win elections, and you do. You have to set the groundwork to win elections, and then you have to start winning elections. You don't have to win them all, but you do have to win enough that it clearly shows momentum on your side. As we saw even in the late kind of 2008, 10, 12, 14, 16 range, there was momentum on the conservative side in picking up seats all around Washington State, and then it stopped. And that stop of those pickups of those seats is the reason why we're dealing with all kinds of empowered crazies in Olympia coming up with a lot of dumb ideas. So we have to be able to find a way to push back. I don't want to take away from the fact that we got to focus on the judiciary. It has got to be not an afterthought. It has to be something that's focused on with a higher level priority, but it has to be done intelligently. And just because it's nonpartisan doesn't mean that it doesn't have partisan support. You have to go in there, when I say you, I mean all of us, we have to start really clearly identifying who are the 10 worst judges in Washington. I don't think that's an ask that's too much to ask. Some of us could start to pay attention and start tracking and identify the 10 worst judges in Washington, and let's focus on electing new judges there. That is a benefit that we do have in the state that they don't have in a lot of other states. Let's just remove these stupid bad judges. The ones that release criminals early or do what Judge Sandra goofball did here over the on Friday, shooting down the natural gas initiative for no legal reason, just simply because Inslee was in the courtroom and had obviously put the fix in and told her to do so. Now, she was probably a lefty from the beginning, so she would have done whatever she was told to do and just asked how high she had to jump. Judges like that are the wrong people to have in office at any time. They're as bad as it gets, and it's a good reason to remove them. But you do have to run legitimate people who actually run real campaigns. And that means they have to be willing to work to run real campaigns. Some of the judge candidates that I've run into around the state have been incredibly lazy. They're expecting everybody else to do everything for them. Now there are restrictions, there are some things different for judges, but make it worth a while to come out and help get good people into office. And if you understand the state constitution, that's really where we need to start. Most of these people clearly don't, because they just do whatever they're told to do. But it takes a lot of work. It does start now. You'll see about 3 of my videos coming out, I think 3, maybe 4 over the next week or so. I will be taking my daughter to look at some colleges and our exchange student with me as well to see another part of the U.S. But it doesn't mean that I won't be paying attention or engaged and involved in some of the stuff. Watch my ethics complaint, the legislative ethics complaint that I did file against the House Democrat caucus and their communications team last Thursday. That should be making the news, I think, this week. I've got a couple other stories with the whistleblowers I've been working on that will be significant, I think, for Washington State later on this week. Just keep an eye out there. There's a lot of craziness going on. We're not done yet in Olympia. We're sure as heck not done in what we need to do in this state to turn it around. So there's a lot more work to come. Nothing's going to be easy. With that, guys, thank you so much for watching. And just a real quick, next Monday, I will be doing it again next Monday and next Thursday. I think I'm going to do 2 live streams next week, just the way the schedule's fallen out. So hope to see you then. Bring your questions. Hopefully I'll have some value that I can add to it. If I see you this Saturday night down in Clark County, please come on up and talk to me at the Lincoln Day dinner down there. Looking forward to seeing a lot of my friends in Clark County, and also those of you out in Kitsap on the 12th. Be seeing quite a few of you out there as well. And don't forget, Celebrate Government Day is coming up, April Fool's Day. So we have a lot of fun topics to go over that day as well. Hope all's well, you guys. Just enjoy what's happening out there and get involved, get engaged. The future does belong to those who show up. Try to show up in Olympia, make those comments, even if Tim Eyman and his friends and other people trying to comment got thrown out. The more they do stupid stuff like that in Olympia, the more we can talk about it and expose their corruption. It always starts with us, though. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next week on Monday and next Thursday as well for a live stream. Let me know what you think about the videos that come out, too. Talk to you then.